Welcome to MQC, the Massachusetts Quadball Chat for off-pitch chats with Carsen and Sierra. Going to be kicking things off with a recap of this past weekend.
Yeah, BU went 3-0 on the weekend with great showings from Ethan Dillon, Cleo Brooks, and Will White in the beater game, and then Autumn Munsell. We'll talk some more about them later, how they stack up kind of against some bigger and taller opponents this week.
Yeah. So for Brown, they had some ups and downs, ending the weekend going 2-1, with their only loss being to BU. They really found themselves in a bit of card trouble here and there in some of their games. I think overall they should be pretty happy with how it went. The return of Real Richardson, Mahima Ali had a lot of great plays on both sides of the ball. I know defensively she was getting turnovers with shots being blocked. Offense, she I'd say looked fearless, always willing to take her space. But I think it's really for Brown how they integrate all players. I think they looked their best on offense, especially against BU when multiple of their players were touching the ball, getting a lot of movement going. So I think it's about how they can kind of bring all of these really talented players together to really facilitate that. Then it brings us to Middlebury, who ended going 1-2, kind of led by Kate Petty and Jason Wu. I think Wu scored on almost every single fast break that the team's beaters created, and Petty doing a really good job of distributing in the half court. What I'd really like to see from Middlebury, I think, is kind of the meshing of these two styles. So, like Kate Petty just kind of, being more of a ball handler, kind of distributing role, with Jason Wu kind of on a wing as a support option. I think if they can kind of combine those two skills, their offense is going to look a lot better.
Yeah, and then finally Tufts goes 0-3 on the weekend. They struggled, I think, to start a lot of their games, but later in the day were able to tighten up on both offense and defense to generate some really good goals by the end of the day.
Yeah. So moving on to this weekend, this Saturday, February 24th at 10 a.m., going to be at Harvard's Cumnock Fields for the next round robin. So it's going to have RPI, who's currently in third for the D1 MQC standings, with BU in fourth right behind. And then filling out the round robin, it's going to be Emerson, who currently sits atop the D2 standings.
Yeah, I think the question going into this weekend for Emerson is how do they stack up against these D1 teams? They played a really close game to RPI Boston qualifier with a final score of 160 to 135, but have yet to meet BU this season, so I think they have something to prove once they meet them. I think some players to watch. First is Janie Hillman, who spent the summer on the Forge practice squad in MLQ, who's a really commanding leader for her whole team and can generate opportunities on both offense and defense. And also in the beating game, the return of Peyton Schwiebert, who was abroad last semester. He had a great rookie season, really locking down the backfield for Emerson. And then finally in the quadball game, Daniel Baradat and Ryan Leary are both capable of quadball turnovers and goals, and will look to run the offense for them this weekend. And I think that these players are going to be key parts of defining how their weekend goes against RPI and BU.
Yeah. So I think moving on to sort of the two D2 opponents who are going to be in the round robin with RPI and BU. I'll start with RPI. This is going to be the first time in the spring playing after a bit of a rough qualifiers to kind of end their fall season. They played close games with Brandeis, who are the D1 number one, but also to your point with Emerson, who's at the top of D2. So I think really what they're going to be looking for is just to sharpen things up a bit and have a bit more of a consistent spring. I think the big area that they'll look to kind of develop is really just figuring out how to integrate all of their chasers. So they had really talented high level players in Ad Ojo, Viviana Estrada, Ben Fothrop, all three really talented players who fill these drastically different roles kind of on the field. And so I think it's just about how they kind of come off these summers of development. The first two with Rochester Whiteout and Ben Fothrop with the Boston Forge, and balance that with some of the younger players in Justine Cross, Isabella McCall, and Anson Decker. McCall, she's been playing really well in the fall. Seems to be getting more and more confident in her skills with each game. I know she's always the first to step out and make a hit, take any contact, looking pretty fearless. And then Decker, I think he has the size advantage on every player in MQC. So really hoping that he's going to start to utilize that a little bit more effectively. I think that will, put a really good game going against BU. But if you want to talk more about them.
Yeah, I mean, this weekend we're just going to see how BU adjusts to facing down a team with the height to block shots on a tall hoop from Ethan Dillon and shut down a drive from somebody like Sebastian Sachs. I think Cleo Brooks and Will White will likely command the beater game, against RPI's core, but I think they'll also meet some more resistance with that core than they did this past weekend against Brown, Middlebury, and Tufts.
Yeah, I gotta imagine BU is going to be riding a bit of a high from last weekend. They seem to be in pretty high spirits. With all that being said, I think in terms of record predictions are probably going to be BU ending 2-0 to further kind of their rise in the rankings. RPI likely going 1-1, depending on what version of RPI we actually end up seeing, and Emerson likely to end the weekend going 0-2, but I think with a lot of really good experience, they're going to be playing teams from D1, so I think if they get some good goals, get some good stops, good beater plays, I think they'll be happy.
Up next is round robin 10 between Harvard, who sits at number 2 in MQC's D1 standings, UVM, who sits at number 2 in MQC's D2 standings, and Middlebury, who sits at number 3. Not a super exciting weekend ahead for Harvard as championship contenders this year. This weekend will likely be about getting reps for their depth prior to what is likely to be a really deep cup run. So we might not see stars like Jess Lee and Leo Freed shoulder so many minutes this weekend.
Yeah, which brings us to the Battle of Vermont between Middlebury and UVM this weekend. Middlebury historically has always come out on top, but with a bit of a smaller roster compared to the fall semester, I think we'll have to see how that kind of affects the results. I know when they played at Boston Qualifier right before the end of the fall season, Middlebury took it 150-75. So it'll probably take another really good showing for them to get a win. Like we said before, I think it'll be a lot on Kate Petty and Jason Wu to kind of draw that attention. But I imagine for UVM, they probably want to be as hungry as possible since this is a really good opportunity for them to get that much needed win.
And UVM is kicking off their spring semester this weekend and should look to get off to a running start. I think some players to watch is first Rachel Rose, who is a key part of UVM's aggressive 2-2 zone that they run on defense, working really tight as a shadow defender, and also is a huge facilitator on the offensive end through her passing and half courts. In the beating game, Jack Maldevere and Abby Rainey are their top pair and play more cohesive, I would say, than Middlebury's beaters, and should look to use that to their advantage. And then lastly, Carter Boudreau is really difficult to stop on the drive once he gets a head full of steam. And Jack Forden in the open field can be a really scary sight to any defense. So those two will likely look to tag team to succeed on offense.
Yeah, got to see who kind of takes the temporary crown of, winner of Vermont. But I'd say in terms of record for this round robin, it's likely to see Harvard go 2-0, pretty uncontested. My guess would be Middlebury going 1-1 as well, with UVM going 0-2. But I'd like to think that the game between those two will be pretty close. So yeah, I'll have to watch and see.
Thanks for joining us this week. Tune into the MQC Facebook page for a live stream of this weekend's games starting Saturday at 10 a.m. and we'll see you next time.